What matter of emptiness is this? What color of darkness makes blind the eyes of a caring God? What is the full quantity of nothing? Find out on this week's episode of Giant-Sized Violence.
Welcome to Giant-Sized Violence, a Toku Comics podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, and joining me today is a very exciting first-time guest. She's the co-host of My Marvelous Year and My Ultimate Year, aka Extra Issues, a comics scholar, and fellow comic book rainbow belt, Charlotte Fierro. Welcome to the show, Charlotte.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. Just to give the viewer a quick rundown of some of your other work, I obviously know you from My Marvelous Year and My Ultimate Year, but what else should our listeners know?
Yeah, so my presence online is mostly from the My Marvelous Year podcast and the subsequent My Ultimate Year, where we cover the Ultimate Universe, and then Extra Issues, our newest show, where we just allow ourselves to cover more topics in comics. And then I've written some comic book Marvel reading orders for Comic Book Herald, which is a website owned by my co-host Dave, about characters like Wolfsbane, Magic, etc. And then, yeah, I've written a few stuff about trans characters in Marvel Comics, also for Comic Book Herald, and that's mostly my presence online.
Yeah, all awesome stuff. I know in my previous podcast, Comically Confused, it was a New 52 podcast, pretty similar to what you do with My Ultimate Year. And I'm pretty sure we even used Comic Book Herald a couple times for that show. So, weird little full circle moment.
Listen, Comic Book Herald is incredibly useful when you're looking to get into comics. Incredible, very easy to go through lists. I actually listened to because I think... must have been like 6 months ago. I tried to do that, to do the New 52 just on my own, and I just started listening to your podcast as I was doing that. And yeah, the New 52, that's a lot. I need to go back to it, but I need to select a few comics and not try to read everything, because that's way too much. That's way too much, man.
Yeah, and only 4 of the books are good, so
yeah,
you might want to
basically,
laser focus on that.
Yeah, Action Comics by Grant Morrison is really good, though. That's one of my favorites. And Animal Man by Jeff Lemire was also one of my favorites.
Now, our first time talking, you had mentioned a few things that I had never heard about in the nature of European comics or the comic book industry in France and what the comic book shops look like over there. And you have some experience actually working at those shops, right?
Yeah, so for the past 2 years, I've been a student at university, and I'm studying for a master's degree in children's and YA literature. And in the context of that master's degree, we have to do some internships. And so last year and this year, I did some internships, one at a bookshop that does comic books, whether it be French comics, Belgian comics, American comics, and then manga. They also do children's literature and then games, like just tabletop games and kind of paper games. And yes, did that. And then this year, I worked at what is more like what you might imagine as a comic book shop in the US, which is one of the rare actual American style comic book shops we have. We specifically focus on selling American comics in English, which is not something you can find easily in France without just ordering online. And yeah, it's definitely two very different experiences. The first bookshop was very focused on representation of queer books, of Black and overall POC books, of books about handicap and all that stuff, which is really cool, and also neurodivergence, and all overall focus on being kind of a place for just socialization. They do a lot of events in the evenings. They do game nights, role-playing, RPG, D&D nights, Magic the Gathering nights also, and they expose a lot of art of local artists in the bookshop. They also have a small cafe as part of the bookshop. So very much a place for people to just come, hang out, have a drink, and not just buy books, which is really fun and something. I don't know if that's something that's common in the US, but that's something we have a lot in France. Bookshops that double as cafes or coffee shops.
Yeah, our large bookstore chains do tend to have coffee shops in them now, like our Barnes & Noble and such, and they do have comic and manga sections, but they're a pretty small area of the shop. As far as our comic book stores go, like, they'll often branch out to board games and trading card games, but that's about it. Like, it's rare you'll even find manga in a typical comic book shop here.
Yeah.
So I like hearing that children's books and those hangout areas are really common in French comic book shops. I really think that's something we could benefit from here, since I know the industry is always panicking about the lack of young readers. And I mean, what better way to get new eyes on your comics than selling them alongside kids' books?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I hadn't realized before you said it just now, but like it's actually like chain bookstores never have coffee shops or cafes in France. It's always like small independent bookshops that have them. But like I've never gone to the US, but I know that in Britain at least, that's also, I've seen that a lot of big chain comic book shops or just bookshops overall have those coffee shops, and it's maybe less present in the independent stores. So that's interesting. But yeah, like definitely bookshops in France also struggle to get younger readers, except for mangas. Like manga might be the biggest. So I think France is like the second bigger consumer of manga. I think probably after Japan. If I'd have to guess, like the Japanese culture of manga and anime has been like really present in France ever since like the 80s, 90s. Like most kids have read like Naruto, Dragon Ball. Like they are a big part of what you read as a kid, more so than I think, from what I understand, in the US. And that also was because of Japanese anime being published or like shown in on the TV like early mornings before school, like as early as the 90s. So yeah, that's like a big part of French culture of books, is like kids buy a lot of manga, a huge lot of manga, and that's the main thing that is so most books that are sold in France are manga, which is like it's weird to me to imagine that like in the US that's not the case at all. It's way more, I think, from what I said, it's growing, but it's definitely not as huge as it is in France.
I mean, I know the manga sections are certainly growing in our bookshops, and manga here, it might not sell quite as much as France, but it does outsell American comics hand over fist like every year. So yeah, I'm really not surprised to hear it's that popular, or even more so internationally.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that despite having like the biggest movie franchise in the world, like superhero comics, are somehow unable to connect with young audiences, because they can't help but center around pleasing to 40-year-olds, because that's how Marvel and DC work, sadly. But yeah, hopefully they can start to learn from manga of how to do that, how to connect with younger audiences.
But as far as comics for older audiences go, I think it's time we take a look at this week's subject matter. We still haven't heard any news about when UltraMega is going to be coming back to the shelves, or when issue 5 might be coming out. So rather than waiting with bated breath, I've decided to change the show's subtitle from a sheer UltraMega focused podcast to just Tokusatsu-inspired comics in general going forward. And to kick things off, I thought we'd look backwards in James Harren's history with his previous creator-owned book, along with Dave Stewart, their predecessor to UltraMega, Rumble, which is written by John Arcudi and had Dave Rubin take over artist duties from James Harren in its second volume. As for the story itself, well, I'll get our discussion kicked off with a quick summary of the book. Thousands of years ago, an immortal warrior god named Rathraq and his warhound Slanjaw wandered the earth hunting a race of monsters known as the Isu. That is, until the Isu managed to separate Rathraq's soul from his body and seal it underground for thousands of years. He wakes up in the modern day, with his soul now trapped in the body of a scarecrow. His fellow gods left Earth while he was imprisoned, and his faithful hound died waiting for his return. Now, Rathraq has to navigate a modern American city in his quest to avenge his dog and get his body back. To make up for his now fragile and incredibly flammable body, he enlists the help of everyday loser bartender Bobby, his best friend Del, and love interest Tima to help in his war against the Isu. But will this war spell doom for mankind, or can Rathraq's friends find a peaceful solution in his conflict with the Isu? Rumble seeks to answer these questions in a story of revenge and finding love at the end of the world. With that out of the way, Charlotte, what were your overall thoughts on Rumble?
Yeah, it's interesting. I honestly didn't know what to expect, because like the only thing I know from James Harren is UltraMega, and I don't know, that's so much tied to the like Power Rangers style of storytelling that like I had a hard time imagining what he would do in like a more fantasy style, urban fantasy, which I actually didn't know. I thought it was just fantasy, and it's funny because his style still adapts incredibly well to a more Conan the Barbarian style story, because in a way those aren't that different. At least when you're depicting the huge fights between the big heroes, big hero warriors, and big monsters. I think a lot of the fun in Rumble is the same as in UltraMega, which is the designs of the weird creatures he can come up with, and then like the big fights, which are incredibly fun. It's definitely very different from UltraMega in, I guess, the way the main story is structured and the way the protagonists work, which is like down to, obviously it's a different writer. James Harren is doing his own thing in UltraMega. But yeah, I guess I really enjoyed especially the first half of it, where James Harren is the artist. I think the whole thing is interesting. I can't help but think, and it's nothing against the second artist, but I can't help but think that something is lost after James Harren leaves. But yeah, I had a lot of fun reading this.
Now, Charlotte, I like that you brought up how different this book is from UltraMega, because in its style and scope, it certainly is a change of pace from the other book. But I did notice some similarities in the themes and ideas between the two. We've got kind of an arbitrary war between gods and monsters that's kind of made worse once they involve humans in that battle. We've got like monsters living discreetly in American cities until they're confronted by our hero, kind of like the kaiju that grow into their giant size when they run into UltraMega. We've got a disembodied god dependent on kind of a weak, emasculated protagonist, a bunch of cool, asymmetrical James Harren or Hellboy-style monsters, and some really interesting commentaries on war and violence and kind of the futility of this war between our heroes and monsters.
Yeah, it's definitely like, once I started reading Rumble, I was like, oh, are these part of the same universe? What's going on here? Because like the issue and the, I can't remember, they have named the monsters in UltraMega are very similar. First of all, in design-wise, because just it's the same artist, so it makes sense that he'd bring similar sensibilities. In the thematic role they play in that war between gods and monsters, between maybe evil and good, although that's questioned by the comic for sure. Yeah, I enjoy that. Like the Rumble has more of a hangout vibe because you're just hanging out with the main characters than UltraMega does, because UltraMega is like skipping ahead in time and like trying to bring the whole scope of that city and the monster rule in that comic. Except instead, Rumble just focus on the main characters and just them hanging out and being faced with those crazy monsters and the crazy war between Rathraq and the monsters. So like it has more time to just have those characters hang around the monsters, and the monsters have like, we were able to start liking some of the monsters and be like, oh, those are just like funny little guys. Like, why are you hunting them? I like them. Yeah, and I think Kogan, the trickster figure here, plays a role in that by being the bridging kind of figure between those two worlds. Him existing helps us like put the monsters in some way on the same level as Rathraq and the other human protagonists, of like, oh, these are just like different both sides that are in conflict, but it's not necessarily that Rathraq and the humans are the heroes and the monsters are the villains. Like, depending on the scene you're on, it can be the reverse, which I actually really enjoyed. Like, it helps us question Rathraq's motivations, surely. And yeah, like I really like that the monsters here, the issue, are given full personalities, and like you're as much on their side as you are on Rathraq's, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, they really humanize a lot of these monsters. Like, there's a little Hydra creature, Lerna, that kind of acts like one of the demon or monsters, like cat or dog, and there's like a very loving relationship between the two. And it's like, wow, yeah, I really hope Rathraq doesn't kill either of these. Like, I like these two. Or like there's a fire demon that, like, even though he's kind of the big threat of the first book, like they really show that there's a tragic element, or at least a traumatic element, when the main character is forced to kill him. And thankfully, death doesn't really have the same consequences in this with the Isu. Like, a lot of characters that die come back later in the book, or there's some kind of revolving door on hell. But yeah, like, just how emasculated and like weak this little fire demon is when he's kind of brought down to his tiny, like, little pea-sized form without being all engulfed in flames.
Yeah.
On the note of, like, yeah, this weird hangout vibe that the book gets, I think this is the one thing that really benefits the book when James Harren leaves after the first couple trades. Like, I really love what James Harren's art and his contributions for the book did as far as setting this, like, gritty urban fantasy noir book, like this dark revenge tale of Rathraqs. But once they switch artists to Dave Rubin, there's certainly a much lighter tone to the book, and that seems to be where we start to see the heroes and the monsters, or the Rathraq and the monsters, making friends, or like just more casually spending time with each other.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it goes from this like gritty Hellboy style urban fantasy to almost something like you would see on something like a higher end Cartoon Network cartoon, like something by Genndy Tartakovsky. Like, I'd really describe the second volume's art style as more of like Samurai Jack meets I Hate Fairyland. And
yeah.
A lot of the story vibes remind me of a Cartoon Network show that was on when I was growing up, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, which was about two kids that kind of trick Death himself into being their best friend, and they go on little adventures together. And similarly here, you have this like immortal war god that wants revenge, that kind of has to hang out with these two bums and kind of like navigate the world through them. And yeah, they just also sort of want to hang out with him, or like get him to not only think about his quest to regain his body.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it feels like there's a really missing piece here of, I don't know why, like how much of that is caused by the change in artists, and like maybe because of there's a different creative presence here, maybe the series takes a kind of a different path than it would have, and I don't know how much of it is like, no, that's what would have always happened because of what happened at the end of towards the end of the first volume with Rathraq became those like kind of Isu orphan monsters that he keeps under his roof, kind of. So it feels like, yeah, not knowing exactly the reason for the artist change makes me wonder, like, yeah, would that be what would always have happened, or is it just a consequence of, well, different artists, so it has to kind of be a different book, which I actually kind of enjoy, that they're not fully trying to just like ask the Dave Rubin to just do his best at a James Harren imitation. Their styles are like similar in some ways, but I think, like you said, different enough. I think the main difference to me is just, like you said, in the portrayal of the characters themselves, that feel more cartoonish, but also more expressive in the second half, or in the second volume. And I think that really helps with that hangout vibe and just like character interactions. And yeah, maybe you lose some of that kind of epic urban fantasy feeling, but I don't think that's necessarily bad. Maybe just slightly less to my taste, but I think it doesn't mean I don't think it makes for a worse book at all. Maybe what I like less in the second half is delving deeper in the mythology of that world, with the goddess on the islands and that stuff, which like my eyes kind of glaze over as soon as the book goes into that, because I think it's more, I don't know, I think it's more successful when it doesn't get into the specifics, when it's just like vaguely epic, if you know what I mean. Like in the first half, the cosmology of Rumble definitely evokes like Asgard in the Marvel universe, which is like you have the All Father and those great gods of old against like weird monsters of not Ragnarok, but basically Ragnarok. And you even have the Loki type figure of trickster gods between the two. And I think like when it's vague enough but evokes something you already know, that's fine. Like that's all I need to know. When it tries to get into the, I don't know, it might sound meaner than I mean it, but I don't think the cosmology world building part is what's interesting about the book. I think it's like, it's real fun as an excuse to have those weird fights and those weird interactions between the mythical and the Conan the Barbarian big fights, and the like, they're just he's just a little guy. He's just a random guy that's happened to come into this huge conflict, and that's something I really like with the protagonist, is that he has that vibe of I'm just a little guy, leave me alone. But he also, like, he's not dumb. Like, he figures out one of the I don't remember the specifics of it, but there's an interaction towards the beginning between Kogan and the protagonist, where like Kogan is like kind of leading him into that weird world of magic and fighting monsters. And he's just like, okay, no, I get what's going on. Like, I'm not dumb. I know what's going on. I just don't want to be any part of it, man. I'm just a barman. That's a vibe of a protagonist I really appreciate. Yeah, I guess maybe the second half is, I don't know, like I was reading the a letter towards the end of the first issue of the second book, and like the writer barely mentions the artist change, or like but barely mentions James Harren specifically. So I was like, oh, did they I don't know, was there a falling out or something? But then the last issue of the series is like James Harren coming back to do a crossover with Headlopper. So it's like they still had a working relationship. They're probably still friends and everything. So yeah, I don't know if James Harren left the book just to do his own thing. I don't know if there was a falling out or anything.
The only thing I could find on James Harren leaving the book was a tweet or two he made that seemed pretty amicable, just announcing that he had left the book and that it was in good hands with Dave Rubin. Yeah. And it sounded like he was getting more pulled toward other projects he was committed to. And I can't say I'm too terribly surprised, because I think that the first couple volumes of this had a lot of delays in their issue release. And I mean, if it's anything like UltraMega, like I think issue 5 was expected in 2022, and here we are 2 years later and haven't heard much. But like I don't want to fault him for it, because he obviously put so much work into his art, and I think it's just not an art style that has a quick turnaround time. So I think rather than just putting the book on some kind of indefinite hiatus, they decided to switch artists and keep it going with kind of a new sensibility. Now,
yeah, for sure. It is interesting, because like the first volume of the book, in its credits, was very much like James Harren and John Arcudi as like co-creators, even if one is more focused on the writing and the other is the artist. But like it had very much that vibe of, oh, they together created this story and this universe, not just like the writer creating the universe and the artist like applying that creation. So like that feels like that's something that could get very jarring if you have to change one half of that whole. And I think like it is, despite what maybe I like less about it, I do think it is very impressive that the second volume is as good as it is, considering that this felt very much like a co-creation of a writer and an artist.
And I mean, like, UltraMega is an expertly written comic, and that was James Harren's first writing credit on any comic, so I'm sure he had a really strong hand that he played in like the creation and the world building and storytelling of that first volume. So like I can't say for sure, since it's not documented anywhere that I could find, but like I'm assuming that did play a big part on the tone and kind of the shift in focus of that second volume.
Yeah, for sure.
But as far as James's depiction of Rathraq, though, like the one thing that really blew me away about his art here, more so than just like the other similarities it has to his work in BPRD or UltraMega, was how expressive he makes Rathraq in his modern scarecrow form. Like the design is really pretty simple. Like it's a plain kind of burlap sack for a face and two big white like Coke bottle eyes. But even though the face itself never changes, like they don't do the thing you do with Spider-Man or Deadpool eyes where you have him squint and change size with emotion, he still manages to put like a huge amount of emotion on this expressionless sack of a body. Like when he's in a fight and things aren't going his way, or he loses his sword, you see like his hood is gone and like he looks terrified despite not having any facial features really. But when he's more serious and brooding or meant to be intimidating, like he'll have a hood over his face or he'll be cast in more shadow, and now that exact same plain face all of a sudden looks like some kind of dark anti-hero that you should be afraid of.
Yeah, there's a really fun duality to that character design, where in the fight scenes and in the scenes where he has to be threatening to the monsters, there's like, oh, this guy is just like a pile of cloth and wood, and he still just killed 50 other guys. Like that, there's something like weirdly impressive and uncanny about that. That's really fun. I think I mean, he's basically like just kind of a weird ragdoll that is so malleable that like, yeah, you can make him do anything and be really threatening in that way. But then in the scenes where he's just like talking to a human being, there's something really like strange about his vacant look. Like you can't tell what's going on in his mind because like he's just like two weird white dots on a brown like paper cloth face. So it's like I can't tell what's going on with this guy. I don't know if he's happy or what was going on. Like just in a conversation, he's just like this weird vacant. He's just a scarecrow. He's just a scarecrow. And then in the fight is where he shines because he can be threatening like that because it's not just in the face, it's in the posture and everything. Yeah, I like the duality of being both incredibly threatening and dangerous, and then kind of awkward and vacant in the dialogue scenes. I think that's really fun. That's like a very clever. That's a very clever character design. I actually, like in the like 2 or 3 first issues of the second book, he has a new design because he got like the remains of his human body. So he has like his kind of parts of his skeleton around him and like his skull in front of the scarecrow mask. And I don't know, that design looks so much less threatening to me because it looks a lot more classic, I guess. Like I've seen that design before. It's kind of a skeletal looking design. So like it looks way more threatening to the point that I was like really glad when they dropped that design. I don't know if it was because like people responded negatively to it or if they were just like, no, yeah, that's part of the arc that's going on. Like once he's evolved to the point of more fulfilling and realizing who he actually is, he can drop the act of that weird skull and thing. He's just like, oh, he's just a ragdoll guy and he's fine with that, which is fun. Yeah, I think that design is classic and really fun.
I did like that redesign. They brought it in for what I view as like the body dysphoria arc, since that's kind of what Rathraq's dealing with this whole book. Like he had this huge like Conan the Barbarian style giant warrior body in his original time, and now he's a flimsy scarecrow, and like you can feel the pain in him so much, even in that expressionless face, when his body that like somehow has been mummified and preserved all these years finally gets burned to a crisp, and like he's not going to be able to possess it again, and like that's what drives him to go crazy. Like I'm sure that wasn't exactly the vibe they were going with gender dysphoria, but like to all my other trans listeners, I feel like there's a really good lens you can look at this through that, and like you eventually kind of see him come to terms, like not just with the situation and realizing he's gone too far in his Skeletor form, but like by the end of the series, he seems a lot more at peace with who and what he is now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting reading. Yeah, no, that's fine. I also think that idea of him trying to get his body back and then his heart back in the second half is like a really interesting way to make us on his side in a way that I would never be if it was just like big barbarian is basically committing genocide.
Yeah.
But like that added wrinkle really helps of like, no, he has more going on than that, and he's a character you can understand the motivations of, even if you don't have to agree with them. I definitely don't. But like yeah, I can at least like get into his mind and understand like, oh, there's something more to that guy, and like I can feel the pain he's going through in a way that I never do with like Conan the Barbarian. Like it's impressive that the comic managed to win me over, even though I really don't. It's not my thing. The Conan the Barbarian style stories, not my thing. Really not my thing. So it is kind of impressive how much the comic managed to win me over despite that.
Let's not forget he's also like, he's just lost his dog in his perspective when he wakes up. Like he's got a bit of a John Wick style quest going on for him, and so like even though he is kind of merciless and like these monsters really aren't doing anything to harm humanity, like you really feel his emotional pain both with wanting to have his body back and also like, oh yeah, his most trusted loved one he now knows died just waiting for him to come home, like Homer's dog, and or not Homer, or like Odysseus's dog, and like that's just such a tragic thought. But
I want John Wick 5 with Keanu Reeves playing a scarecrow, and it's the ghost of John Wick hunting a scarecrow and going after everyone as a Scarecrow. Do that for John 5, please.
Reverse Matrix, like now he's in a much weaker body.
That's incredible.
But yeah, with the second arc though, like we see the book doesn't just like change in one direction, I'll say, because I mean we immediately have the Skeletor arc, but then like I mean all of the art style is obviously different, colors are brighter, faces are more exaggerated. We have like our beach episode arc on that island, which did feel kind of weird and out of place for the series, and I felt like it was there that all of a sudden the stakes for the series kind of disappear. Like, we see Del and Tima, who are, for the most part, just human beings, like, they're fighting off hordes of monsters coming after them, and, like, not so much as getting injured among them. So, like, it maybe helps me understand how a Scarecrow is able to kill, like, 50 monsters, but also makes me think that maybe we didn't need a race of warrior gods defending us from these people.
Yeah, there's definitely, like, I think the very real threat the characters are in, the very real danger the characters are in the first book is, like, part of, what's going on? Like, you feel like they could get they could get killed by a monster at any moment. And the second volume with the artist change very much felt, like, more cartoony in that way, in, like, no, like, rules of real life don't necessarily matter, and yeah, it's fine for those guys to just... Like, it's very much that D&D thing of, like, oh, they've won, like, 10 levels in the meantime, so now, they look the same, they can drop, like, any kind of monster. Which is, I agree, it feels weird, but I think I just accepted it as part of the change of vibe, and kind of the change of genre, I guess, because, like, the second half goes into that whole, like, quest trip part of, what was the word I'm looking for? Like, road trip, right?
Yeah, like a apocalypse road trip kind of arc that it wraps up with. And yeah, I kind of came to terms with it by that point as well, because like, I mean, now the heroes are going from fighting small monsters to like the Horsemen of the Apocalypse or the Scourge Knights of the Apocalypse. And I'm really confused about the pacing of the book towards the end, just because, like, yeah, it's not just that the heroes seem kind of a bit more invincible at this point, but, like, we know that these plagues and other signs of the apocalypse are affecting the planet, but that's never really explored, like, when all the food is taken out by famine, or, like, death is running rampant, or, like, all the various other plagues, or, like, the war, like, wars breaking out and everyone's just pissed at each other. Yeah. I was kind of bummed they just jumped right into the apocalypse without much lead up or time to process it. And it made me wonder if like they knew some kind of end to the book was coming. But
yeah, it has that feeling of like, oh, we're not getting another season? Well, I guess I gotta wrap this up in an hour then. Okay. Because like, yeah, the whole Horseman of the Apocalypse part is like 4 issues, 1 for each Horseman, if I got that right. Which is like, oh, that's quick. That doesn't give the room you need to give those characters like the threat they should be.
And our very ground level characters are each kind of able to take on one of the Horsemen on their own, which just really threw me off. Like Tima, while pregnant, uses some kind of love magic and power, and is able to overcome like pestilence or plague, something like that, or like one of the fire. Demon, oh yeah, we got magic baby fetus that gives her the power to...
it feels very much like, oh, you had like a whole lot of ideas for like 15 more issues and you have to cram it all in 4 issues. Yeah, it feels very, oh boy, we don't have room to breathe here. It feels very quick, and you never have the time to feel the danger the characters are in, because like as soon as you feel that, they've won, which is kind of a shame.
What really confuses me about that, though, is, like, for one thing, I couldn't find any information on the internet about the book actually being canceled. Like, there was never any announcement for that or any Reddit posts about it. It just seemed to go on hiatus and not return, like a lot of creator-owned image books do. And also, the last 2 issues of the book are anthologies that mostly take place in Rathraq's past, which are pretty cool on their own right. Like James Harren returns for some of the short stories. They get some incredible fantasy artists to return as well. But I really felt like those 2 issues would have been much better served, like giving the apocalypse more time to breathe, or giving some kind of resolution on the character arcs for these people. Because Like, we do see them grow closer towards the end, but there's never really that bookend moment showing that, like, their friendship is solidified and, like, Rathraq's giving up his war on the Isu.
Yeah, that's the thing, because I at first when I saw that those last two issues were like kind of anthologies of different one-off stories with different artists, I thought maybe what was going on is that those were stories that were published elsewhere in like kind of image magazines or stuff like that, and then collected together for the last two issues. But I didn't find any proof of that, of them being published earlier elsewhere. And actually, like the last issue's first half is like a crossover with another image comic, which is Headloper, and like that was very much like announced as like the last part, as like published first for that last issue. Like it wasn't published elsewhere at any point. It's definitely weird. It's definitely really weird. I don't know, like, was the story popular enough to earn that kind of like victory of lap of like we're inviting other artists of that are fans of the book to do those final stories for the two final issues? Like, it doesn't feel like that kind of huge book where you invite people over to celebrate its ending. Like, I'm glad they got that, but I feel like I would have like you said, like a more proper ending, quote unquote, better.
I'm surprised they didn't use these elsewhere, because I feel like they had opportunities in Image around that time, and James Harren's done that quite a bit. Like with UltraMega, he got a short in a Skybound anthology, or like the last thing we've ever seen from this series was in the Image 30th anniversary anthology. In the third issue of it, they have like one standalone short where Rathraq kills this Gutvang character who's like a recurring cannibal that's been like eating these little hybrid children of the Isu and humans. And like Rathraq gets reunited with his new dog in the modern day that was kidnapped, and like that definitely gives a more sweet moment for the series to end on than just a bunch of random short stories. And I was glad we got that, but again, like, I really think this book needed something as a dedicated final issue. Like, what are Bobby and Timah gonna do now that Timah's pregnant? Like, are they getting married or going off somewhere? Or, like, what does Rathraq plan to do with the rest of his life in the modern day? Or, like, can he pass on like the rest of his gods?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it feels... I mean, the first book ended like a while before it got picked up with the second volume, so it feels like maybe that kind of ending. But like, it's been what, 4 years at this point, so I definitely don't see a Rumble Volume 3 announced soon. Although like that would be fun, that'd be interesting. But like, I don't think that's what's going on. Yeah, it's like, it's a shame that. I mean, yeah, I can't dissociate that from the last few issues feeling maybe rushed is harsh, but like feeling going really quick and we have to conclude fast. Like, that feels like they knew they were not going to get the chance to continue the story further. It's a shame, but also like it feels like maybe the right choice would have been, let's forget about the next arc we had planned and just like expand this, what we're doing currently, to give a better ending. But yeah, like, it's definitely like, it's a tough situation where you're like, I have to sacrifice like a lot of fun ideas I have. No, I still want to tell them. So I definitely get why they did it, but it does make for kind of a frustrating reading experience, being it like, one more, please, one more to conclude it. And I didn't get it.
And I mean, the whole second volume really is kind of the slow telling of like the enemies to friends story trope. Like, we find out Kogan the trickster is like kind of Rathraq's father-in-law from back in the day.
Which is really skipped over.
Yeah, the little fire demon that's been a recurring pain in the butt is like the thing that really saves the day in the end and allows them to defeat death itself. And like, that also brings in its own like this weird monster that even Rathraq at his strongest couldn't fight in ancient times. And so like all these villainous forces kind of come against each other, and like it's weird that like friendship is what saves the world. And yeah, I just would really have loved to have like a happy bow to put on at the end of this. And I think that the beach or the island arc we didn't love all that much, like, does set that up. And I think if they didn't go the apocalypse route and instead maybe did something with Rathraq now answering for his actions and like finding a way to make peace with the Isu rather than stop the surprise end of the world, I feel like we could feel a lot more satisfied with how this book ended.
That's interesting, because like there's a lot of cool ideas in there, ideas I love on paper, but like they're not given the room to breathe. So it's it's a shame. I do want to talk a bit about Kogan, which is like probably my favorite character in the book. I mean, I'm a sucker for like trickster god characters. That's why I love Loki so much in the Marvel universe. And I really love the idea of the aging trickster. Like, you did the big betrayal like 2,000 years ago, and now you just have to live with that and keep going and just keep having a life outside of that because you're immortal. And like him just kind of hanging out with the monsters, but also like just living alone and going out to drink at bars, and that's kind of all that's going on with him before the beginning of the story. That's really fun. I like that idea of like, yeah, cool, you've done the big cosmic betrayal you were supposed to do, and now I guess you're still living. That's fun. And like he's
tricking his way out of his tab at the bar.
Yeah,
he's still a trickster guy.
Yeah, that's a really fun character archetype. And I think I do think one of my favorite parts of the second volume is him building that relationship with Rathraq, of being like, which makes sense when Rathraq is starting to doubt what he thought was true of the world, and like starting to break the barrier between him and the monsters, that he would like the one guy who'd be able to relate to that in some ways, like the guy who was a god and betrayed the god to go over to the monster side, like the guy that has a foot in each realm. Like that's a fun relationship to me, and I really love them like butting out and butting heads in the first half, and starting to learn to appreciate each other, and Rathraq seeing the pain that Kogan has been through. And he's just like, Kogan's just a fun character. Like he's I'm sure he must be really fun to draw. Like his expressions is like James Harren's expressions for him are really, really fun, and his whole like character design of the skeletal arm is really fun to me as well. Really love that character.
Is there anything else you want to touch on before I kind of wrap things up with question of the week?
No, I think I covered everything with Kogan. I think it's a really, really fun book, and I'm definitely interested in seeing the earlier stuff James Harren has done, but also like kind of checking out what John Arcudi has done elsewhere, because there's very much some story stuff and ideas here that I really dig, and I would love to see what they've done elsewhere. Yeah.
So I know this has been a recurring theme of our conversation, but overall, do you think that this book should have continued without James Harren the way it did, or do you think it should have just stayed on hiatus until he had the time to dedicate to it?
Ooh, that's interesting. I mean, I don't fully know if James Harren, like, I don't fully know if he had the intention of going back to it after the first volume, and I do think the first volume ends on it ends leaving the room for more story. But it does end on a satisfying enough note that I think I very much would have been fine with it being the whole of Rumble. But I do get that, like, if the creators, or creator singular, if it's just John Arcudi, has more story to tell and wants to tell more story, then yeah, they should be free to do more. And I think so. I guess there's two things. I think maybe my problem with Dave Rubin's art in the second half is it is very close in some ways to James Harren. Like, it is the same kind of style. It's not like a huge shift in like it's going, like if it was going in like a full manga style or something, I guess. Like it is still in a very similar vibe. And maybe I guess like I would have enjoyed just them making the decision of like, no, we're doing a different thing now, and the book's gonna have a different vibe. It's still the same world. It's still like it's a sequel. We're picking up where we left off, but the book's gonna have a different vibe because the initial story we were telling was very different. And yeah, I guess I would have enjoyed maybe them going in a more different directions visually. So I think in the 16th issue, there's one like short story that is drawn by Gerardo Zaffino, who like I didn't know from anywhere else. I really dug his art, and I think his art, he drew Rathraq in a very interesting and fun, but way different way. It's more realistic, still stylized, like it's not fully like real world like, but it is more realistic. And I think maybe I would have enjoyed kind of going a similar direction of, we're doing a fully different things and with a fully different artist, and maybe like it would feel more uncanny as a result. Like you're not trying to see you're less trying to see the first book and compare the two. It's like, no, it's completely different thing. But yeah, like as a whole, I think if you have more story to tell, go ahead. And I think that's a dangerous thing, because it tends to fail more often than it succeeds. But like, if they want to do it, they're right to do it. I think is my philosophy when it comes to that.
I mean, I know what it's like to have a collaborative project with someone and then life just gets in the way, so you both can't contribute the same things. Like it happens in podcasting and comic creation. And yeah, it sucks if the other person is just left hanging. So like, I'm glad James Harren seemed to give his blessing to continue forward. And like, they really did a great job finding ways to not make this like just the diet version of what James Harren was doing. And the end of the series, like, even though I might have liked a continuation of the previous story with the last 2 issues, they do at least show what the series could be going forward, like with all these different time periods and art styles and ways this could be explored if they wanted to just keep on going and like not step on anyone's toes.
Yeah, for sure. And even like going that and like continuing that anthology route, if you have if the main story is ended and you can just like go across that universe and tell different stories in its different corners. That sounds like a fun direction, although I don't know how long you can keep up that momentum. But yeah, it would definitely be a very different book. But I'd be curious to see what they would do with that. Yeah.
Now, speaking of other projects, though, I know we've mentioned My Marvelous Year and extra issues, but Charlotte, is there anything else you'd like to plug, or where can the listeners find you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly very much focused on those 2 things for now, because like I mentioned earlier, I'm doing a master's degree, so I don't have much time to do anything else than writing my master's thesis, which is on the character of Loki in the Marvel Universe. But yeah, we're still doing My Marvelous Year. We just reached the year 2003 in Marvel publishing history, which is doing some really fun stuff. Brian Michael Bendis' Daredevil and Grant Morrison's X-Men being the 2 main ones that like really fun and like must read. And then Extra Issues, which is our new podcast with my co-host Zach, where we just feel more free to tackle different topics. We did a first wave that's currently going on about superhero subversions, so stuff like Watchmen, The Boys, Planetary, that kind of stuff. And then we're doing a second wave on the works of Molly Knox Osotag, which is a YA writer and artist, which is whose work is really interesting and very different from what we usually study or like read in My Marvelous Year. So yeah, feel free to check that out if any of that's interesting to you. And I think one of the things that are more new listener friendly in Extra Issues is that you can just kind of listen to any episode you want if it's like about a comic you're interested in, whereas like My Marvelous Year has more of that reading club structure where you just like try to keep reading along with the club. So yeah, if there's any of those comics sound interesting to you, feel free to come check out Extra Issues.
And for any listeners looking for more of a listening club of Charlotte's work, I know you joined My Marvelous Year as a recurring host a little ways on after being a spontaneous guest host. What point was it, or like what year was it that you started becoming a recurring guest host?
Ooh, so I think it was around 2 years ago. I think the first episode I guest hosted on was about Infinity War, the 1991 events or 92 maybe, events by Jim Starlin. I think I joined around like 1994, something like that, so early 1990s, which must have been like a year and a half ago in real time, so yeah.
Well, thank you again, Charlotte, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And yeah, we'd love to have you on again someday.
For sure.
If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for content you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on our social media. You can find us as Giant Sized Violence on our Facebook page, on Twitter as @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizedviolence@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you again for giving our podcast a chance, and give a special shout out to artists Ray Day Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro and outro music is a mashup of You're an Ace Kid by Demon Dice and The Slap from By Divine Right, generated by Rave DJ. Also featured this episode was Fierro File und Bogen by Linked Horizon, the original opening theme of Attack on Titan. We hope you join us again as we continue to explore the movies and shows this comic draws influence from. But until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.